7. Welcome, everyone, to week 17. And I cannot believe we're already here. So let's talk a little bit about what we're reading and what we're doing this week. And then we're going to talk about the Stanford prison experiment, which is one of the very most interesting psychological experiments out there. All right, so week 17, my friends. Oh my goodness, it's already May. I can't even believe it. Please watch the weekly overview videos. I think it helps immensely to have a face and a voice to walk you through what's going on. And this week you are reading 2 chapters. And so please, I know it's a lot, but please read your 2 chapters, set aside some time for it. And I think you're going to find the action really starts moving in these chapters. I think you're going to find it goes pretty darn fast. And of course, you're always welcome to read ahead. All right, the assignments due this week for week 17. Let's talk about those. You have the Zimbardo quote document. So this is interesting. I think you guys are going to like this. It's a little bit something a little bit different than what you've been doing. Not quite a quick write. You have a document here in the folder, and you see it up here at the top. It's also here in the Zimbardo quote assignment. But when you open it up, you're going to see it's about 2 or 3 pages, and it's just a bunch of quotes by Dr. Philip Zimbardo. All right, so that's the document. Your assignment for this is to choose any one of the quotes from that page, any one of them that you like. If you can also find another quote from him if you want to do your extra research, but just choose any one quote from that page or from anywhere else, and you're going to write 2 paragraphs based on it. Paragraph 1, you explain the quote, what it means in relation to what you know of Philip Zimbardo and his work through the TED Talk. We're going to talk about the TED Talk here in just a second. You can also talk about what that quote means to you, why you chose it, why it struck you, what struck you about that particular quote, why it stuck out to you. Paragraph 2, that's when you're going to relate it to Lord of the Flies. How does this quote relate to any of the events in Lord of the Flies? Does it explain why certain boys are behaving in different ways? Does it explain why Jack or Ralph or Simon or Piggy or anybody else, what their mindset is at this point in the story? You can use as much of the book as you're comfortable with. So if you have read ahead, really all the better. That's even great. So use strong textual evidence from Lord of the Flies, as well as from the TED Talk, from any documents, from the quote sheet. You could use that article from week 16, the Science of Good and Evil article. If you want to look anything up about Philip Zimbardo, you're welcome to do that too. All right, the rubric is right here, so you have a clear idea of what I'm looking for when I grade it. Just make sure you follow this, and you're going to get a great grade on it. You have a discussion post, the Psychology of Evil and the Lord of the Flies discussion. In this discussion, relate the content of the TED Talk to what you have read so far of Lord of the Flies. The farther ahead, the better. Do you see the principles that Zimbardo discusses being demonstrated by the boys on the island? Do you see any dissenters, any of the boys who are going against that behavior and becoming a hero? Or do you see any of the boys slipping into more destructive behavior and habits? Be really specific here. So, relating it back to the book. All right. So, to do that, though, you need to watch the TED Talk. Now, this is one of the most popular TED Talks out there. Dr. Philip Zimbardo is just so interesting to listen to. But I do want to give you a warning about this one. There are graphic images of torture from the Abu Ghraib prison at the start of this TED Talk. When we watch it together in class, if we were doing that, I just cover up the projector because it's about, I don't know, maybe 15 seconds of photographs and images from that, and it's not integral to understanding the entire talk. You can skip through it and still perfectly understand what he's talking about. They are pretty graphic, they are disturbing, so watch with caution or skip through them. That's my advice. If we were in class, I wouldn't show them to you. But just be warned. That's all. Heads up. You can skip through them and not miss anything of the TED Talk. All right? But it's so interesting. We're going to talk in a few minutes here about the Stanford prison experiment, which is just one of, the Milgram experiment is interesting, but I think the Stanford prison experiment is just equal, if not more interesting. But before we do that, my friends, I want to talk us through the book a little bit. I want to talk us through chapters 5 and 6, and then we will talk about the Stanford prison experiment. All right, so chapter 5, Beast from Water. This chapter, we're really talking about fear here. We're really talking about fear when we talk about this chapters 5 and 6. How fear is bleeding into their daily lives and what they are going to do about it. We're also talking a lot about authority. Whose authority are we recognizing? Is Ralph losing authority? Is Jack gaining it? Are all the boys starting to not play by the rules? Ralph moved impatiently. The trouble was, if you were a chief and you had to think, you had to be wise, and then the occasion slipped by so that you had to grab at a decision. This made you think, because thought was a valuable thing. That got results. Ralph recognizes that he needs to be thoughtful. He's recognizing the increased need to listen to other people, especially Piggy. Ralph was a specialist in thought now, and he could recognize thought in another. He's recognizing how valuable Piggy is, even if other people don't. He still belittles him, and he still calls him Piggy, and he still does all of these things, but he does recognize that Piggy is intelligent and thoughtful. Ralph holds an assembly and tries to get order over the little ones and tries to emphasize the importance of the fire. He's interrupted and has to fight to maintain control. We start to see a breakdown in how important the conch is to people. We've seen it before, but it's starting to get more and it's starting to get harder and harder for Ralph to hold the crowd together. The thing is, fear can't hurt you any more than a dream. There aren't any beasts to be afraid on this island. You useless lot of crybabies. Unless, so this is Piggy talking, and Piggy's trying to get the crowd to think scientifically. Look, fear is what we're afraid of here. Dreams are what you're afraid of. Things, shadows are what you're afraid of. There aren't any monsters on this island. This is what Piggy's saying. We would have seen them. It's a small island. You guys are afraid, but you're a bunch of crybabies. Unless we get frightened of people. Now, this is Simon, and Simon is way more thinky than the others. Simon is starting to recognize that we don't have to worry about a monster so much as we need to worry about each other. Each other is the enemy here. Piggy tries to calm the crowd, saying that people are scarier than any monster in the woods. All right, so a little one named Percival claims he has seen a monster that comes out of the sea. Ralph tries to calm him and everyone. When Jack says you can be frightened because people are frightened anyway, that's all right. But when he says there's only pigs on this island, I expect he's right. But he doesn't know, not really. As Piggy says, life's scientific, but we don't know, do we? So Ralph is holding back in saying there's no monster. He probably would be better off just to say no monster right now. But Ralph is saying, well, we don't really know, do we? Simon became inarticulate in his effort to express mankind's essential illness. What's the dirtiest thing there is? Simon's effort fell about him in ruins. So Simon tries to get a point across that us people, us human beings on this island, are scarier and more dangerous than anything else. We are what we should be afraid of, and as long as we hold it together, we'll be okay. But it doesn't work. They don't understand him, and it just loses it. This leads to people talking about ghosts, which now just adds to the chaos and disruption. And finally, Ralph or Piggy says here, because the rules are the only thing we've got. And they're right. This is a very true statement from this story. Rules are the biggest thing they have. If people are paying attention to the rules, then they'll be okay, but they're starting to not pay attention to rules. All right, moving on to chapter 6, Sam and Eric. Now there's two people here. There's Sam and there's Eric, but they're twins, and so the people have just started calling them by one name, Sam and Eric. I know. If any of you are twins out there, you've probably had this thing happen to you too. Sam and Eric think they see the beast while they're tending the fire at night. In a panic, they run to wake up Ralph, and it's decided that the boys should hunt the beast. So, yeah, they think they see something in the shadows, and Ralph he goes along with the idea that they should all go off and hunt the beast. Simon is skeptical. Simon's like, come on, guys. Simon felt a flicker of incredulity. A beast with claws that scratched, that sat on a mountain top, that left no tracks, but yet was not fast enough to catch Sam and Eric. However, Simon thought of the beast. There rose before his inward sight the picture of a human, at once heroic and stark. So Simon doesn't think there's a monster. Simon thinks that this is just people on the island. He thinks it's people. It's just our imaginations, and we should really worry more about each other. They go on this hunt through the island, and what they find, not a monster, but they find an outcropping of rock that resembles a castle. And it has almost like a bridge of rock that you have to walk over to get to it. And Jack thinks it's a great place for a fort, and easy to defend. He points out that you could roll rocks down across this bridge that gets to the outcropping, and you could really take out any attackers. And of course, Ralph's point of view is like, from who? We haven't found anybody that's trying to attack us, right? I mean, why do we need this? Plus, there's no fresh water up here. We're too far away from food. This is not a good place to be, right? A mutiny nearly breaks out over staying at the castle or returning to the beach and the fire, but for now they follow Ralph back down the mountain. But at the end of this chapter, you have to ask yourself, is his authority going to hold? Because there was an awful lot of the boys, led by Jack, who were saying, we need to stay up here at the rock. We need to stay up here at our castle. They keep calling it a castle. And we need to defend it. All right, so think about that as you are reading chapter 5 and 6. Okay, my friends, I want to talk a little bit about Philip Zimbardo and the Stanford prison experiment. This is a very interesting psychological study, and I think you're going to see some parallels in the book, in the way the boys are behaving at this point in the book. You're also going to see some parallels, obviously, with what we talked about last week with the Milgram experiment, and it's a very interesting point of study for this book when you think about the Stanford prison experiment. And he talked about this a lot in the TED Talk, so I might be repeating a bit of what you learned about the Stanford prison experiment from that. So Dr. Philip Zimbardo conducted the study in 1973 at Stanford University. The purpose of it was to find out whether rising reports about violence and brutality in American prisons was due to the personalities of the guards, or was it brought on by the prison environment. Problems haven't changed that much over the years, basically, and there was a lot of reports about police violence and the violence of guards towards prisoners in American prisons, and Philip Zimbardo decided he was going to try to find out why. Was it because the guards were people who chose to be prison guards of a similar personality type that was prone to brutality? Like, did only really mean people want to be a prison guard? Or were they driven to this behavior by the environment they were in? Were they really no different from you and me? It's just that being in a prison could drive anyone to being brutal. That's the question. Zimbardo's hypothesis was that the environment made the guards act in a particular way that was maybe contrary to their normal personalities. He said a bad environment can turn a good person bad. And a good person, a moral person, a kind person could go into an environment like a prison and still be turned into somebody who's violent and brutal and cruel. That was his hypothesis. So to prove it, to start, Zimbardo and his team converted a basement at Stanford University into a mock prison. They went all out on this. I mean, this was an expensive experiment. They went all out. They had gates that locked. They had anything that you might find in a real prison, and they had quite a bit of space to do it in. He advertised for volunteers. They were given extensive interviews, personality tests to eliminate anyone with any kind of psychological problem, tendencies to violence or anger, criminal pasts, mood disorders. They did not want anyone who already had a pre-existing condition, if you get what I mean. They didn't want somebody with anger issues or criminal past. They wanted people who were as stable as possible. The resulting 24 were deemed to be the most mentally stable. They did not know each other. That was another thing that had to be in place, another requirement. They did not know each other prior to the experiment, and they were paid $15 a day to participate, which wasn't even that much back in 1973, for the record. All right. So prisoners were randomly, and this really truly was random. I know some of these say it was random, but it wasn't. No, this was very random. They were either a prisoner or a guard. Prisoners were treated like real criminals. And you guys saw this in the TED Talk, the Philip Zimbardo TED Talk, if you've watched it already. And they showed a little short video of it. It's really interesting. But they were treated like real criminals. They were arrested at their own homes. They were fingerprinted, photographed, booked, and then led blindfolded to the mock prison where they were locked in a cell. The prisoners, they were treated like absolutely like they had really gone to prison. They were stripped of their clothing, they were deloused, all their personal possessions taken away from them. And from that point on, they were only referred to by their prison numbers. They did not have a name. They were only, 8712. They were only a prison number. They were dressed in kind of a light smock, like prison clothes, that only had their number on it. Guards were dressed in khaki, so something more like a uniform. They were given a whistle and a billy club being that little stick, that the cops could smack you with, and sunglasses. They were instructed to wear sunglasses, the purpose being so that the prisoners could not see their eyes as much as possible. The guards worked 8-hour shifts at a time, while the other shift would be on call, and they were given freedom to do whatever they felt necessary to keep order. That was the instructions they were under. Remember the Milgram experiment where they were given an order? Well, in this case, the guards were ordered to do whatever they felt necessary to do to keep order in the prison. All right, day one. Day one occurs within hours. It just took hours, and the guards began settling into the roles. Prisoners were woken up at 2:30 on day one with whistle blasts. The prisoners began already at this point talking amongst each other and trying to kind of sweet talk the guards. The guards began implementing physical punishments, push-ups while a guard stepped on the back of the person doing the push-ups, sitting on their back while they did push-ups. This was just day one. 24 hours has not even passed, and they're already doing this. It just gets worse. Day two. The prisoners through a rebellion. Now, remember, though, as I'm telling you guys this, remember that, 2 days ago, these were all just college kids. They were all completely equal and like they'd researched them to be equal, right? And there was nobody that had particular strength or respect or anything else. These were all just normal people. This is what happened after day two of this. The prisoners threw a rebellion, barricading themselves in their cells against the guards. The guards sprayed the prisoners with carbon dioxide, which I guess makes your skin feel like it's being hit with ice. They broke into the cells, they stripped the prisoners naked, and removed the beds. The prisoners who were part of the rebellion were denied food and forced to watch others eat. They were also denied the right to wash themselves or brush their teeth. This is only day two. This is just day two that this happens. It just got worse. 36 hours into the experiment, prisoner number 8612 began to demonstrate rage, anxiety, panic, and Zimbardo realized that this guy needed to be removed from the mock prison. So this was one who was taken out of the prison, which actually worked to upset the other prisoners really greatly, because why did this guy get sprung from it? Philip Zimbardo sent a Catholic priest into the experiment, and he was instructed to treat the prisoners like he really would. This was a priest who talked to prisoners in real prisons. This is what his job was. And he was instructed to talk to these kids that were in an experiment as though they were really in prison. And so he would tell them things like, you can only leave with this prison with a lawyer's help. He just sort of fed the idea that this was real. The level of mistreatment from the guards escalated. It led to having prisoners clean toilets with their bare hands. Prisoner 819 became hysterical, referring to Zimbardo as a warden and apparently not remembering the experiment, really thinking he was in prison and absolutely having a panic attack. In fact, this was really interesting reading about this one, because it wasn't until Philip Zimbardo said, I am a doctor, I am a professor, you are in an experiment, this isn't real, that prisoner 819 remembered that he wasn't really in prison. That's just how real this had become to them. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks, but it was terminated after 6 days. The big takeaways from the study were the power of individuation and learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is in this last slide is the works cited page if you want more on that. Uh, Learned helplessness is the idea that we talked about with the Milgram experiment, where we are accustomed to following orders, right? If we're told from very early ages to follow our parents' orders, our doctor's orders, teachers, police, all these things. We're taught this behavior from our very earliest days on the planet, that we respect authority and that there's a certain helplessness that we have when it comes to defying authority. The prisoners in this case went into this with a learned behavior, and when somebody said, I'm a guard and I have authority over you, they believed them on some level. They still recognized the authority that these people had, even though in reality the guards are just fellow volunteers, which is interesting. De-individuation, that's what happens when you reduce everyone to a number. You take away the prisoners' names and now they're numbers. You take away the guards' identities and they wear sunglasses and now they're just you don't see eyes, you don't see anything human about them. You put them in a uniform, so they're all wearing khaki, they're all the same. I want you to think about this experiment in relation to Lord of the Flies because it's super interesting. Chapters 5 and 6, you have some evidence of this. You have learned helplessness. You have boys who are going to follow Jack or Ralph blindly simply because they have said that they are in charge. You have the idea that I'm going to follow orders and commands, not because I agree with them, but because you have said I have to, right? You have demonstrated authority over me, and I have to learn it now. De-individuation. They do this to Piggy all the time. Piggy started off not having an identity, and it just gets worse. Piggy goes from a joke to being the guy with the glasses, right? And now his only value to this group, after a while in this book, he has no name, he has no identity, is his glasses, is what he can bring to the picture in terms of helping them light the fires. That's it. His value as a human has been taken away. Uh, watch how Jack changes in this. In our last chapters that we read, how the boys start to follow him and how they start to change their behavior based on Jack painting his face, putting mud on his face, putting on a mask, putting on something that takes away his identity. So it works the other way too. You remember Philip Zimbardo talks about the idea of putting on masks and how that can lead to really violent behavior. So think about how that plays into it as well. All right, guys, thank you so much. And I will be here to answer any questions that you have about this talk. Thank you so much for listening.